Hello, welcome back to another amazing segment. Good to be back. It's been a couple of weeks since we had like a proper, conversation. I'm so glad you're here, because what we're about to talk about in the next, 12 to 15 minutes could genuinely change the trajectory of your career. So I'm super excited. And today we're talking about, limiting beliefs, those quiet, persistent thoughts that will tell you that you're not, ready, you're not qualified, not the kind of person who gets the job, the promotion, or even sit at the table. And here's the thing, right? If you have ever, talked yourself out of applying for a role or, gone silent in a meeting when you had something valuable to say or to contribute, or maybe you have watched someone that is less qualified than you, go ahead and you be like, wow, that's just how it is. This video is exactly, designed for you. And also, I want to be clear about this session and what it is and what is not. This is not a motivational speech. I'm not a motivational speaker. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you how to think positive and, believe in yourself. I'm not going to talk about all that. I'm just going to tell you straight on how to make it work, the why, the process on making it work. We're going to focus on that. What I'm going to give to you instead is just going to be very, very practical, right? Evidence-based method, the same framework that is used, in the cognitive, behavioral therapy, right? That's helped a lot of people, including professionals, across the world. So let's get straight into it. Like I said, your breakthrough starts here. Right, so let's get started, right? Let's start with the foundation. What actually is a limiting belief, right? So a limiting belief is not just a negative thought, like most of you would think, right? It is deeper than that. So it's like a deep conviction, something you hold true about yourself, about the world, or about what's possible for someone, like you. Think of belief like, saying something like, oh, I'm not the leadership type, or people like me don't, succeed in environments like this. Those are very, fleeting thoughts, and most times, to be honest, they feel like facts, and now where these beliefs, the question, where does these beliefs come from? No, sometimes you be like, oh, they don't, the truth is they don't just appear out of nowhere. They form from your past experience, a time you failed and, you drew the wrong conclusion. They come from, family messages, things you were told, growing up, sometimes even directly, sometimes through words, wasn't even said. They come from, cultural stereotypes, social environments that will put a ceiling on your ambition, before you even had the chance to even, go ahead and even test it. So here's the part that makes them so dangerous. They create a very self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you believe you're not ready, you avoid opportunities. Because if you avoid opportunities and you never get that evidence that make you feel that you are capable, so the belief stays alive, untested, and grows, stronger. So I want you to hear this clearly. These beliefs are not truths. They are old stories. Stories that you have inherited, absorbed, and constructed to make sense of, painful moments in your life. And like, old stories can be rewritten. That's a beautiful part, right? And that's exactly what we're going to do, in today's session. So let's look at what the belief actually is. Look at it in bits in practice, because they show up in very specific ways in your career. So I've listed, about 10 most common ones here, and I want you to honestly read through this table, right? So I currently have the table on the screen. So the first is, imposter syndrome, very popular. You avoid going for promotions or, for any important roles because some part of you is convinced, that you'll be found out, something like that. Also, not enough experience. You skip job applications entirely, even when you meet, eight, out of 10 requirements, because you have talked yourself into focusing on the two, that you don't have. That's another thing. Also, it could be, oh, too old or too young to switch. You have said that it's too late, or too early. And so you stay stuck in career that isn't, right for you. Another thing is the fear of failure. You never pitch your ideas, or you will never volunteer to lead because you can't afford to be, seen getting things wrong. That's another key thing again. But that thing is, these fixed abilities. You have said that they're just, not strategic, not creative. I'm not a numbers person, and because you have decided that, you never try, all those fixed mentality that you have about yourself. So I want you to do something right now. All right. So mentally, I want you to raise your hand if any of this sounds, familiar. I don't want to mean like, vaguely familiar. I mean like you have felt this, you have acted on this. It's a shape decision you have made, over time. So if your hand is up, right, I need to know you are not alone, right? Research shows that over 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their career. So the problem isn't that you feel this way. The problem is that is staying stuck in it. That's where the problem is. You staying stuck in it. So it's about to change. That's about to change. That's what this session is all about. All right. So now I'm going to walk you through the method. I want you to say upfront, this is not something I made up. This is adapted from the cognitive behavioral therapy, which has, decades of clinical evidence behind it. I have, applied it specifically, to the context of career development, especially for my students, and these are 4 steps and they build on, each other. So I need to follow them in sequence. So the first thing is identity. That's step 1. So you're going to spot, your avoidance patterns. What are you consistently delaying or walking away from? That's step 1. Step 2 is the evidence. So you're going to gather real, concrete proof that contradicts your limiting beliefs. Step 3 is reframe, right? So you are going to craft a new belief that is realistic and grounded in that new evidence that you have created. So step 4 now is testing. Test. You're going to run small experiments, in your real life and let the results do the work of rewriting your amazing, beautiful story. So now you might be wondering, how is this different from you just telling myself, oh, I'm great? How is it different from, affirmations? So here is the answer, right? Affirmations asks your brain to accept something that has no evidence for, and your brain is smart enough to reject it. So this method works with your brain, not against it. So every step builds evidence, and the evidence is the only thing that actually shifts a deeply held belief. So you're going to take it step by step, in making sure we build that with proper evidence. So step 1, okay, so this is the most important step. Like I said, identifying your avoidance patterns. I want you to ask yourself, what do I keep putting off? What opportunities do I look at and immediately find a reason not to pursue? Is it promotions, networking, public speaking, salary negotiations, whatever it is? That avoidance is not laziness, it's a signal. And we're going to trace it back to a source, using a technique called the downward arrow, right? So here's how it works. You take the thing that you are avoiding and you keep asking why, repeatedly until you get to the main raw truth. What does this say about me? Until you eat something that feels very raw and true. So let me give an example. Say you keep skipping your job applications. I say, so why? Oh, because probably I won't get it anyway. What does that say about you? What does that really say about you? I'm not really qualified. Why do people believe that in the first place? Because if I got the interview and actually had to perform, I'll be exposed. Exposed as what? You could say, oh, as someone who does not really belong here. And here it says, I don't belong. That's a core belief. So now, this comes up in a very specific way, depending on the context. For a lot of people in this community, I might sound like, oh, I'm not local enough. Whether it's not about, maybe it's about my accent, your network, maybe your name in your CV, that's a real belief shaped by real experience. It's exactly the kind of belief this method is built, to dismantle. So right now, pause this video right now, write down one thing you are avoiding, just one thing, and that's your starting clue, and it's the beginning of your way out. All right. So moving forward, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to do this exercise properly. Please don't rush it. You can pause the video and do this. Very important. So I want you to list 3 things you are actively avoiding your professional life. Not things that are just inconvenient, things you avoid because something you says that's not for me, or I will just embarrass myself, or it won't work out anyway. Something like that. Write down that avoidance, number 1. Then the next thing, what's the first thing that comes to your mind after you wrote that thing? No. Then avoidance number 2, maybe it's asking for maybe a pay rise, maybe applying for maybe a senior role, maybe reaching out to someone on LinkedIn who could, open a door for you, whatever that avoidance is. So that's the next thing you're going to do. Then also list avoidance number 3. And so now for each one, now I want you to sit with the question. What is the core belief, underneath that avoidance, behind this avoidance? Not the surface reason, the deeper one. The one you don't usually say out loud. Yes, that's pretty much the one, I want you to talk about. So write that down. And then, like, this one is optional, but it's very powerful. You can drop it in the comment section. I'm going to read it. And, something that always happens with this now, that's something that's so important is when you write it loud and when you say it loud, even the text, or maybe to an audience, or people who are, doing the same work, it kind of helps you to lose some of its power that is holding you down. So it becomes something you are, really, really working on, and not something that defines you. So like, I would really love if you can put it on the comment section. I'm going to read it. I'm going to give you a bit of comment on that. So let's share it and let's do it together. Let's make this very, very practical. All right. So step 2, after I've written those 3 areas, or areas you're currently avoiding, step 2 is where things get really interesting. And honestly, is where most people experience their first breakthrough. It do this very, very, very well. Right. So we are building what is called, evidence file. And the reason we need to do this goes back to something called confirmation bias. Your brain right now is actively, filtering your experience. It's holding on to every piece of evidence that confirms your limiting belief. That one time you froze, in the meeting, the promotion you didn't get, the presentation that didn't lead the way you wanted, and it's quietly disregarding everything that contradicts it. That's how the brain works. So we're going to flip the lens deliberately. So look at this table. On your left, if you can look at your screen, we have the kind of evidence your brain has been collecting, froze in the meeting once, no formal leadership title, skip a promotion round, your brain has been, treating this as proof of something about who you are, But look at the right column. If you can look at the right column, you can see your team consistently hit deadlines under your watch. You mentored 2 colleagues who got promoted. Your manager told you at your last review that you're promotion ready, and also you can see a client told you your presentation was clear and well prepared. So that evidence exists. Your brain has just been ignoring it. That's the interesting part. So your job right now is to fill the right column, right? And fill the right column first, not the left, the right. Fill the right first. So your brain will automatically, populate the left column automatically. Just try it, you'll see it. So that column doesn't need your help. Just focus on the right column. Just focus on that. So write down every piece of evidence that contradicts what you believe about yourself. Every compliment, every result, every moment someone trusted you with something important, build that file, that evidence file. Because, in the next step, we are going to need those evidence you have been able to, build. So the next thing is that we now get to reframe. So I want you to really, be very precise about what a good reframe looks like, because this is where people often get it wrong. A reframe is not an affirmation, it's a positive spin, is a belief that is honest, that is realistic, and directly supported by evidence you collected, in your step 2. So let me show you what that looks like, right? So belief is, I'm not qualified for this role. And that belief is keeping you from applying for things you are actually capable of doing. So the new belief, the spin-off will be, my skills transfer. I'm actively growing the gaps. That's honest. It doesn't pretend the gaps doesn't exist, but also it doesn't let the gaps become the whole story. And that old belief could be, I'm not a natural leader. Maybe you have been comparing yourself to maybe a certain type of leader. that is loud, that is confident, and always at the front of the room. Your new belief could be, my leadership style is quieter. My team's results confirms it, because they do. The evidence collected in steps 2 says so, right? So here is the contrast I want you to hold on to, throughout this session is that, so if you compare those reframes to something like, oh, I'm a genius, that's a pure affirmation, and the reason it doesn't work is that the moment you say it, oh, I'm a genius, your brain fires back with every piece of contradicting evidence that's on your file. It rejects it immediately. So a good reframe doesn't trigger that rejection because it's grounded in reality. So it's like a stretch, but an honest one. So when you read your new belief, you should feel slightly uncomfortable. Like you are quiet there yet. You're not quite there yet, but you can see how, it could be true. And that's exactly where it needs to sit. All right. So moving forward to the next slide, right? Step 4 is where your belief changes and stops being a mental exercise and becomes something real. So we need to run an experiment. You need to take actions, collect evidence, and let that evidence do the work of rewiring your brain. So I want to address something here. A lot of personal development advice that tells you that, oh, you need to believe it before you can do it. I'm really going to challenge that in this particular session, right? You don't have to fully believe the news story yet. You just have to act as if it might be true once, right? And then you just log what happens. So this week, I want you to volunteer for one task outside your comfort zone, one thing you normally talk yourself out of, and when it's done, write down what happened. What did you learn? What did reality actually show you? Because that data goes straight back into your evidence file, and your evidence file is what your new belief, is built on. Research, from University College London, found out that it takes an average of 66 days, to form a new habit. Now, I'm not necessarily 21 days that most people believe, right? So we're going to do the 66-day rule. That's where it comes from. We're going to do the 66-day rule. So you need to repeat the experiment enough time that the new belief now becomes your automatic and new one. So here is the 7-day challenge we're going to start with. So day 1, you can apply for a job, one role that feels slightly out of reach. Maybe day 3 can say, oh, you can speak up in a meeting. And so the thing you will normally keep to yourself. Maybe say day 7, so maybe connect with one, new contacts, someone who is where you want to be. So if you do those 3 things and log results, and that reality starts, rewriting your story. So that's a very good place to start from. Take action. Don't wait. All right. So the evidence we have covered today is underpinned by one big idea. I want to make sure it is very clear. It lands very clearly to you. So there are 2 ways of relating to your own abilities. The psychologist, Carol Dweck, call them fixed mindset and growth mindset. And our research kind of changed how we understand, human potential. A fixed mindset says that, oh, I don't change. Oh, I can't change. This is just who I am. So it avoids challenges because challenges threaten the ego. It gives up when things get hard. It sees effort as, pointless. Because if you have to try hard, it must mean you're not naturally, good at it. And it ignores, feedback because, feedback is like a threat. That's like a very fixed mindset. For a growth mindset, it says things like, oh, skills and abilities develop with effort. It embraces challenges as, learning opportunities. It kind of persists through, difficulties. It sees effort as a path, to mastery. And it learns, from getting critical feedback. Because feedback is an information. So that's how a growth mindset sees it. So this method I've shared today is essentially a structured way of moving from one column to the other. So every time you build your evidence file, you are practicing a growth mindset. Every time you run an experiment, you are living it. So I want to add one thing that Dweck's original research, sometimes gets stripped of, in popular culture. One thing is self-compassion. Progress is not, linear. So you run an experiment and it will not go the way you hoped for, and you can end up reverting to your old belief, on a very hard day. That's not failure. That's how change, actually works. Be as kind to yourself in those moments, as you would be to someone you care about. Keep going. So don't give up because your first attempt didn't go well. Keep trying. That's the essence of the whole exercise. You have to have a growth mindset. All right, so we are at the end, and I want to leave you with the 3 actions, not a list of things to think about, but 3 things you can actually do today. So action 1, audit one belief, which is very, very important. Use the downward arrow technique to trace one avoidance back to its core. Ask why and keep going until you eat something that feels very raw and true. That's your starting point. All right. So action number 2, reframe it with evidence. Open a document, draw 2 columns, and fill the right one first, like I said initially. And every win, every piece of positive feedback, every result you have produced, get it on paper. Then write a new belief that is honest, that is specific, and grounded in what you have just written. Then action number 3, run one experiment. Nothing. 1, pick the smallest, the most, manageable, brave action you can take this week and do it. Then write down what happened. Let reality be your teacher. So you don't need to overhaul your entire mindset today. You just need to start. One belief, one reframe, one experiment. That's it. So the version of you that applies for the role, speaks up in the room, negotiate for what's the awards, that version is not far away. It's on the other side of a very few deliberate steps, and you have just learned those steps today. So let's go. All right, so you are very, very close to that amazing breakthrough. And before we close the video, I want to do something. I would love for you to drop one limiting belief in the comment below. The one that showed up when you did the exercise, the one that has been quietest but the most persistent. Please write it down. I'll read every comment and I'll respond. There's something generally very powerful about naming things publicly, even to strangers on the internet, because it shifts from something hidden that has power over you to something that is visible that you can actively start working on. So if this video has been very useful to you, please hit subscribe. We're gonna have more videos coming in, and make sure that everything is gonna be beneficial to you and help you grow in your career and in your personal life. So, all right. So finally, the free reframe worksheet is linked in the description. I'm going to drop it in the description. You're going to walk you through everything we have covered today in a format that you can fill out and just keep for yourself. So go grab it. It's your first practical step. So please, you can share the video with someone who needs to hear this. Who beneficial to someone. You can use the hashtag, overcome limits, career Africa, unlock potential, and yeah, that would be really beneficial to us as a team and for this channel. So like I said, your legacy starts today. I'll see you in the next video. God bless you. Have a great day.